Welcome, everybody. I'm Betsy Alwyn. I'm Visiting Director of Ceramics and Expanded Media, and I'll be introducing our speakers tonight. I want to remind everyone that there will be a general orientation tomorrow morning at 8:45 in this room. Before we begin, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Thank you. Anderson Ranch would like to acknowledge that our campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people, who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Through our mission to promote a wide range of arts, cultures, and voices, we commit to partner with and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of this sacred land, where we learn, work, and create. Tonight's program will consist of 2 faculty lectures, followed by a brief Q&A. First, I would like to introduce Keun Ho Peter Park. Keun Ho Peter Park is a multicultural Korean-American artist, woodworker, furniture design maker, and instrument maker who teaches woodworking in Philadelphia. He holds a BFA in painting from South Korea's Kookmin University and a 2013 MFA in woodworking and furniture design from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Among other honors, Peter won a 2015 Wharton Esherick Award at the Philadelphia Museum of Art Craft and won a First Time in Show award at the Smithsonian Craft Show in 2022. His website is studiospong.com. Please help me welcome Peter Park.
Thank you. Excuse me. All right. Hello. Here's my clicker. My name is Keun Ho Peter Park. Keun Ho, as Betsy introduced me, I'm Korean American. Keun Ho is my Korean name. Peter is my American name, but also Catholic name. Not that really matters. That's my childhood memory. The kid on the left, right? No, kid on the right is me with my brother. That's a proof that I was born in the States. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and lived for a couple of years. Our family moved back to South Korea when I was a kid, so I don't really have a memory of living in or born in the States. But that reminds me that I was there. That's like Ohio State University football stadium. So I grew up in Korea, and initially I studied fine art, more specifically painting. I thought I wanted to be a painter who does a lot, like a large murals or spray paint graffiti art type, pop art type thing. Like I wanted to be Banksy or Keith Haring or Basquiat was a big influence for me. So I went to art school to study painting, but when I got there and I started doing these spray paint art, I kind of realized that once I'd done it, I kind of was over it and didn't want to do it anymore. But also I realized that I was really interested in making things instead of painting things. Once I saw my upperclassmen stretch their own canvas, and I didn't know you could do that as a painter, that was it for me. I immediately stretched my own canvas, I made my own panels, and that's how I started woodworking. And so after graduating after graduating college, I went to a traditional woodworking school and tried to train as a furniture maker. And it was amazing that I was learning all these like hand skills, but then also I realized this was a reconstruction school. They were only interested in reconstruction work, not creative design. And I knew that I wanted to design my own, so that's when I decided to go back to the States, and I went to Rochester Institute of Technology for studying furniture and furniture design and fine woodworking. So this is some of my earlier work. And I, like, coming from a traditional woodworking school background, I thought I wanted to keep that kind of aesthetic, like traditional craft aesthetic. But quickly I saw myself like kind of leaning towards more, I wanted my furniture to be more gesturous and more dynamic. So then I started exploring, and this is, I reached to this point. So this piece is called a body chair. I think this explains or express what I'm trying to do as my creative practice the best. I see a lot of similarity between wood as a material and our skin or our body or flesh. There's a lot of similarities, like the smoothness when you touch a skin, or the fact that it shrinks or expands depending on moisture content. It has a grain direction. Our muscles have grain directions. It's not so hard, but also it's strong. It has warmth to it. All these things, I see it very similar to our body. So I'm really interested in that aspect of wood as a material, and naturally I get a lot of inspiration from human body. And I also am really interested in human body and wood body contact. So anything to do with touching a wooden surface, but also like leaning onto it or sitting onto it, putting your weight onto it. So, and chair or any kind of seating units is the best device to recreate that experience. So that's what I make. I'm also hugely influenced by artists' work who are inspired by human body, like Henry Moore. So I make chairs. This is called the piggyback chair. I was trying to create something that recreates the experience of me getting a piggyback ride when I was a kid on my dad's shoulder, and rubbing my feet onto his chest and, playing around. So you sit on here facing that way, and that represents my dad's head. So you're supposed to be hugging the head, and then your feet goes down to here, where often my dad would hold my feet, and I can feel my dad's hands holding me. So I was trying to create a piece based on that memory. This one is called Creature. I was inspired, for a brief moment. I'm not really a motorcycle guy, neither a bike dude, but for a short period of time, I was really into like motorcycles, but like really flipping through images. So I wanted to do a seating unit that you can ride. So you can sit over here, but you can ride it facing that way. But you can also sit, and I was really into the idea of leaning to an armrest. So that's just a one armrest that you can just lean onto, where this is just a stool. So this is called a Kookmin bench. So this was also about hiding away when you just want to, drop responsibility and just run away. But when you run away, you get lonely, so you want to invite into your hideaway, so you can invite someone in your hideaway. And the thing I learned when I made this piece, I was really obsessed with making everything really smooth, because I really liked making the touch of a smoothly sanded wooden surfaces. But for a seating unit, it's really counter-functional. Like if you make the seating area all smooth out, you just slide off. Like you can't really maintain a position. So you kind of need some grip on your butt for the seating units to function. So that's when I started like thinking about texture, surface texture, and not making everything smooth. So this was I started putting texture on the seat, and it worked out really great. This is called a thumb stool, because I thought the texture, the pattern of the texture looked like a thumbprint. And then later on, I went into more of I tried to make a really well-functioning chair, coming from where I'm coming from. So these are some examples of the very good functioning chair that I was trying to build. And then this is called the mushroom chair. Well, this one probably shows you the technique that I'm using to create these thin sheet forms that are like very curvular or curvy. So the way I build these forms is I start from a flat board, but I cut them into small little pieces, but in an angle. And then I put them back together with glue in between those angle cuts. So that's what the initial glue up looks like. So from a flat board, you get a one-directional curve, and I make a lot of those. So I sometimes make like very simple curves. Sometimes I make like a reverse U shapes. And when you get a lot of those, you can cut the edges in an angle and then clean them up, and you can glue them together edge to edge. But the important part is I intentionally overlap the seam lines, which technically in woodworking, you don't glue end grain to end grain. That's a weak joint. But because another row of that is overlapped with a long grain directional material, that's how these parts are holding it together. So that's what the glue up looks like. And over time, I realized that you can use clamps to clamp these very weird shaped strips, but I found that rubber bands work really well. So I've been using rubber bands for gluing up. So you get a lot of these, and then if you glue all of them up, then it looks like this. It looks like a whole big contraption. But once you're done with your glue up, then it's the work of power carving using the angle grinder and constantly making marks and then cutting off parts and putting textures. So that's how I built these chairs. So you can see the seam lines really well. So this was called the mushroom chair. Extension of my interest in human body and in wood. I also see wood as a living organism, or at least one's lived organism. So I can make connection to any kind of creature or living organism. I get a lot of ideas from plants, like mushrooms. This was called the wood ear bench because I really got into wood ear mushrooms. And then I started like exploring different kinds of surface textures. Also, I'm really interested in cartoon characters. I call this a ghost stool, or because this one sort of looks like Charlie Brown with the Halloween costume, but also in a different angle, it looks like Stingray. So we also call this Ray stool. Different woods. That was in a photo from a client's house recently. Sometimes I get inspiration from boats, like objects too. A few years ago, I went to Port Townsend and had a chance to walk around one of my friend's boat named Ziska, and I was really inspired by the shape of the bottom of the boat, and I was just kind of, oh, that's something. So I took that shape into making, and I flipped it around and I make it into a leg. So that stool was based on a boat. This one's a collage of a teddy bear and a klezmo chair. Teddy bear on the top and klezmo on the bottom. So I did some shows. This is a showcase from a Philadelphia International Airport. This was the show booth at the Smithsonian Craft Show. This was last year's PMA Craft Show. Yeah. So addition to that, I make, addition to making seating units, I make other pieces like tables. That was inspired by dance by Matisse. That was a credenza that it was based on a living pig named Arnold. That was one of my clients' pig, and I went to visit my client for a meeting, and then when I went into the living room, there was a pig inside the house, and you don't really experience that very often. And later, that client asked me to build a credenza, and I asked her, what do you need it? How do you want it to be designed? And she she wanted something that she hadn't seen it before, and so, maybe I should bring some personal references. So, immediately thought of the pig, and that's how credenza became Arnold. Make lights too. I love making lights. I really love watching ceramic artists work, and I love ceramic arts. I'm just a sucker for a great mug and a bowl. I just can't help myself. But also, I'm really inspired by the process as well and the surface texture. I really wanted the feel of the glazed surface on a ceramic ware. So I was trying to mimic something like that on a smaller piece. So these are some smaller bowls that I made that was really inspired by my ceramic artist friends. And it lets me explore many different textures, different shapes, different grain pattern. Lately, I've been making some boxes. It lets me explore with colors. These are just bandsaw boxes, but the top is CNC'd. And I love music. I make guitars. This is the first copy guitar that I made. And I apply my interest in guitar making as well. So I make all these ridiculous cartoon character guitars. That's another part of my work. But anyway, that's about it for me. Thank you very much.
All right, our next speaker is Mark Newport. Mark Newport's work uses textiles, performance, print, and photography to reveal the vulnerability inherent in traditional Western ideals of masculinity. His work has been recognized by awards from the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation and the Creative Capital Foundation. Mark is represented by the Simone DeSousa Gallery in Detroit. Please join me in welcoming Mark Newport to the podium.
Microphone. What to do with the microphone? There we go. All right. Thank you, Betsy. That was really nice to be introduced. It's great to be back to Anderson Ranch. I was here last year for the first time, and it's like, whoa, this place is amazing. I wonder if they'll ever invite me back. And they did. So tonight, whoops, hold on. I'm trying to get my timer set so I don't talk too long. All right. Tonight, what I want to do is just give you kind of an overview of the work I've done and talk about the ways it's changed and grown. And change might seem like a really straightforward thing to think about because we all do that as we grow and age. But I'm starting here with this slide because change is on my mind because I just left my teaching job at Cranbrook Academy of Art in May. And I find myself on a road trip without this studio that I was in for 16 years, which housed not only my visual artwork, but my musical art at times. Art might be too extreme a word for what my music was. But yeah, like to play drums, like to play bass mostly, and guitar, and was in some bands. So I'm out on this road trip, and I'm in the middle of it. I've been gone for 3-4 weeks now. And it's weird to be a studio artist without a studio. It's really weird to be a studio artist without a studio. I'm living out of the back of my Subaru, and it's been pretty fun. But it's making me think a lot about how much the work changed over a long period of time and how it's going to change in ways that I can't even imagine in the future. So I'm going to start way back, and I promise I'm not going to show every piece I ever made. we don't have time for that. But I'm going to start back in 1985 when I was finishing up my undergrad, and I was at the Kansas City Art Institute, and I was very, very fortunate to basically stumble across the ideas and the way of working that I would do basically till now in some way or another. And by saying that, it was kind of dumb luck. I was started as a painter, which I will not show you because there's some things we don't need to be embarrassed by. And I moved into fiber and weaving in Kansas City purely because I had to take an elective in a place other than painting. And I realized that my grandmother had taught me all sorts of textile work when I was a kid, and that could be an art form, and I didn't have to just be a painter. So I moved over to fiber and started weaving. And this piece, which is called Game Box, is a woven tapestry that's about 20 inches long, has images from weightlifter magazines and pinup magazines. And the idea I stumbled across that time was that the way we thought about gender in 1985, or the way I was taught to think about it, didn't quite work for me. That the traditional expectations of being male didn't make sense when you were, 100 pounds soaking wet and didn't quite fit the body image or any other thing. I didn't play sports very well. And, that's all evidenced by the fact that I'm showing you a weaving, which, meant I wasn't on the baseball or football field. And so I was choosing these stereotypical images, which became a kind of foundation for the work. I would play off of pop culture images. I would play off of ideas of how the body is represented and use materials and process then that evoke the body. Weaving is a very physical, repetitive process. It might be delicately physical as compared to, say, carving wood, but it is something that leaves a residue of what the body is doing and what it feels. And textiles are something that stay close to us. So those are all things that are important to me. As I promised I'm not going to show everything, I moved into developing this work. Eventually things changed. And you might say, I don't see pop culture images here, Mark, but I am still thinking about the body. And this is work from graduate school in the 1990s when I was in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute. And over several years of working from the tapestries to sculpture, what I developed was this way of thinking about using references to body forms, references that might be strongly feminine or strongly masculine, that then evoked the body in different ways than pictorial images did. And this is about 24 inches long from that scale. It's made out of waxed linen. It is knotted together in its hollow form. And all of that was important in the sense of building a kind of reference to a body or a kind of body through repetitive actions and letting those actions make a kind of structure. It also makes the twists and turns in the form. And this piece is called Sheath. It was actually one of the pieces in my degree show when I graduated. The big change from the stereotypical images of, weightlifters and pinup girls and my thinking about gender comes with these as a kind of way of fusing male and female together, thinking less about differences and more about a kind of utopian ideal that we're more similar than we are different. And that worked really well as a philosophy and an idea for a while, until as the work developed and my life developed, my then wife and I had our first child. And in material form and in process form, some of the things that I was experiencing, becoming a new father and experiencing my wife being pregnant, thinking about how the body changed, how hard and soft, how masculine, feminine were different, made me start thinking about the pieces in different ways. And so this piece gets this carved basswood unit that, if you could see the whole form, looks sort of like a tadpole. And then this knotted waxed linen form kind of envelops it and holds it together as though it's forming a couple, as though it's forming a partnership, as though it's protecting each other, although the soft is protecting the hard. So there's as always is the case with the work, there's a play in the expectations of material and contradicting the way you might think about gender. So having a child and sort of realizing that utopian philosophy is good, but not necessarily practical in a lot of ways, led to some heavy thinking about, well, why am I making work about the whole spectrum of gender? I don't actually live in a body that's different than what mine is, which is a cis white hetero body. And so ideas started to change, the work started to change, and we move to the mid-90s, 1995. Been out of school for a while, I've been teaching for a little while, and I started thinking about what is it that were the formative experiences that taught me about expectations of masculinity and being a man. And while I said I wasn't a very good athlete, which is true, and said that I wasn't out doing football, actually as a kid I really, really, really wanted to be a football player, and never quite had the bulk for it or the hand-eye coordination for large motor skill kind of activity. I do small motor skill activity, see? So despite these things being however tall they are now, these are actually real football cards that I've stitched beads on, taking the hyper-masculine presentation of football and that costume and then dressing it up the way you might dress up an evening gown with beads and playing male and female that way and contradicting them. And that started to get back to me being able to focus on what were the expectations I might be dealing with and how was I thinking about these ideas of what are the problems within a traditional gender spectrum binary kind of way of thinking about things. It also was fun. It's not that I didn't enjoy making this work. This work was very peaceful and quiet, and you sit and you're very calm, and that's great in the studio sometimes. But I started making these and I would laugh in the studio. And it was great to go back to collecting trading cards, which I had done when I was a kid, but that my mom threw out all of them because we don't save crap like that. That's a quote. So to play off at things that actually came from my childhood and then were part of my adulthood, and the beads was a way of embracing a full kind of experience of what I was living. The beads, though, and the trading cards changed as that grew because you could find other trading cards. Most of what I did was football cards. And sometimes I redressed the heroes, like in the last image. Sometimes I surrounded them with beads as though they were living in an icon with gold leaf around them and in a kind of sacred space. But there were also trading cards from art stars in the 1990s from New York. And part of collecting is about sort of fetishizing and embracing something and thinking a lot about it and letting that imbue you with something. The art world is the thing that I have spent most of my life being imbued by. So changing a Jeff Koons Gagosian Gallery trading card was my way of saying, well, yeah, I really want to be famous like Jeff Koons, but I detest Jeff Koons with all his work, with all of my body and being. So that contradiction in my own view of the art world and a kind of belief or religion to it was important. That work changed, and I had made, 250, 300 trading cards between 1995 and 97 and got a little bored. But I was like, I really like this idea of changing actual materials and objects. So I moved on to comic books, which were the thing that actually I learned to draw bodies from, which is not a practical way to learn to draw bodies, because nobody's body looks like that, even back in the 80s and 90s. But it was a way of thinking about role models again and who shows you who you can be. And these comic book bed covers were made off of a quilt tradition called freedom bed covers, which were quilts made by the women of a family for the men of a family when they moved out on their own. So it was a way of establishing community and connection and protection. But a comic book page isn't going to protect you, and neither is that superhero, really. So the contradiction of that. These were all stitched together and then embroidered in places where the villain was really prominent or the hero was in danger, which is most pages of a comic book. But it was a way then of also softening and transforming those images. As we move quickly through my life, these happened between 97 and 2006. Around 2003, actually, that overlapped with the comic books, I was thinking about those heroes and thinking about all of the sort of tensions of being a parent with my kids who were now like 2 and 6, and the oldest was doing things like going to the park where you couldn't keep track of her. It's like, that worried me. Like, how do I keep control of things? How do I protect her if she's not within eyesight? With my son, the 2-year-old, it was all just trying to keep him safe in the house, never mind anywhere else, because he would just like walk into the pool even though he couldn't swim. So I was thinking about who is it that protects us and how do we learn about that? And these costumes, this is a hand knit, life size, meaning big enough for me to wear, recreation of a superhero called the Rawhide Kid from first from the 60s and 70s, but then remade in the early aughts. He's a cowboy superhero for a guy that grew up in Western Massachusetts and really, really, really wanted to be a cowboy or an Indigenous American. Yeah, I know, not practical. Making the costumes then was a way of embracing that idea of being the hero. It was also embracing the idea of being something that you can't be, but maybe playing against that with the gloves attached by a string that goes up and through like your mittens when you're a kid, or the bullets being little knit baubles. And it's knit out of acrylic yarn. Acrylic yarn's the yarn of the 70s, at least in my life, when my mom had the brief chance to knit a couple of sweaters for my brother and I, which was her protective gesture. So this is invoking also my personal history in wanting to be a cowboy and my mom trying to protect me and in trying to protect my own kids. The big question you got to ask is, if you're the hero knitting your superhero costume because you're a fiber person and do textiles, when are you fighting the bad guys? Because it takes about 6 weeks to knit a costume if that's your sole job. And so there's an inherent question about action and what is valuable action and how does that work. The costumes were hung like this on hangers and were kind of sculptures basically in a gallery, sometimes against a wall, sometimes in space. But, they're wearable, they have buttons, and it seemed like somebody should wear them, but I don't really like to be in front of people. I know that's a problem for a teacher, but I worked that out. I don't want to do performance art all the time because that's difficult to do, so I staged these photographs, and here's me in the Spider-Man costume knitting the costume closed or fixing the costume, sort of in a rocking chair like Whistler's mother who's doing textile work, but not really. Photos were super hard to do because I needed help. So I realized Photoshop was this great way to then return them back to their comic book world and figure out what they do. And one of the main questions everybody asked about the heroes, and this is Sweater Man, is what's their superpower? And Sweater Man's superpower is when he's knitting, he evokes a force field that may or may not protect people. Also, if you've ever been around somebody that knits, or does other textile work, you kind of know that once they get going, they don't really want to stop. So he knew that if he could just finish this, he could help, was the text on there, like, you're never going to actually stop and finish and help. But that's okay. This did actually, costumes kept growing. Sometimes the costumes were invented heroes, like you saw Sweater Man in the print. This guy is ribbed. When you can make your shoulders be as wide as you want them to be and then make your waist back the right size through just changes in the knitting, it's like all of a sudden the body of the hero and what that looks like can be called into question. This still, quote unquote, fits me. It's just that it's too big in a lot of ways. Just like this Batman is based for my height, but it's based off of an action figure of mature middle-aged Batman who got a little portly and solid. And so it looks like I'm wearing my dad's Batman costume. And eventually all this does lead to performance. And so Sweater Man, this was at a show in the University of Texas El Paso Gallery, a show called Unknitting. And I'm sitting there knitting while the onlookers are being protected by my force field. I know you can see that. And after I've knit for a while, I get up and I identify one person in the audience that I hand a blue knit mitten to and tell them that this will protect them at some point. Everybody else who is in my path while I leave gets a little IOU for one protective gesture and the date that the performance happened. So I gotta get going here a little quicker. Big change. By 2015, the suits are not doing it for me anymore. Actually, by 2013, they're not doing it for me. And I'm thinking I don't really have the same feelings about protection and what my kids need from me because they've become basically adults by that point. And what I'm realizing is all the work is connected through a kind of feeling of vulnerability. What it is that I'm trying to work through is my vulnerability in the world. And so I started this series, this is from 2016, of works where I use historic mending techniques and embroidery to start making recreations of what I think of as skins and shrouds. This is called From Within, and it's about 7 feet across, 3 feet up. There's also a smaller group that's 13 by 17 inches, where what I'm doing is cutting a hole in the fabric that's that sort of comma shape, and then I'm setting threads vertically across the hole and then stitching into them and weaving them horizontally. So I'm making new cloth in the cloth and repairing it like you would have learned in the 1800s from mending samplers. I'm thinking of these as scars, thinking of them as memories, as wounds, also as inside and out. If this is like my skin color, is this what happens when I'm repaired? Am I a plaid? And what does that mean? Is there plaid inside me? Well, like what do we reveal and what do we learn about that? Because the fabric was like skin, thinking that that's very much about how we relate to our body as the second skin of what a fabric is. I started using actual parts of garments, so returning to shirts, thinking like the costumes, but then putting scars and wounds in them in different places and building these kinds of constructions. Also parts of shirts, so this is like a little cuff from a sleeve, this is from the back of a shirt. And working through this kind of feeling of what happens when that wound starts to heal, what kind of implications does it have in the rest of the fabric, and how does that make a kind of set of images. There's one of the cuts there and another one there. And then sometimes there's some systematic projects where I cut apart like 16 or 8, it's 8 making 16 parts, thrift store shirts, and put just the fronts back together, which leaves holes where the sleeves were. And then I start filling that in using that same process, thinking about the labor of putting that together and making this back into a quote-unquote usable piece of cloth. And what does that mean in terms of not only a skin of the world, but a system of production and excess in the way of fashion and cloth production. There's a detail. You can see the stitches that start on the side and then where it's woven together. More small ones, and really quick here. Change. We all make mistakes. This is an Instagram story, obviously. My students were on me about, well, you always do it perfect. It's like, no, I don't. Sometimes I take things out. No, you can't possibly take things out. Why would you do that? It's like, well, here it is. I did it, and whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. And yeah, I didn't like it. That was crap. And that's actually one of the pieces that you just saw. It's that one over there. So cut it out, which is a real drag. It was 4 hours of stitching. It takes like 3 hours to cut it out. Now I'm ready to start back again and do it over, because change is always part of the process and you don't know. And it's, if you look at it too, this is upside down from the way the piece actually ended up being. So I didn't even know what the piece was at this time. It's just working it out. The most recent work, and go quickly through this, is actually using blankets instead of garments, thinking again how they wrap around the body, how that relates to the skin, but it's a different protective gesture. Starting to use larger yarns like acrylic yarn to make these larger holes, and using the dimensionality and thickness of the blanket. It's an old wool army blanket that's been cut in quarters, and this is one part of that and another part, and allowing them to wrinkle and bend and be like we might see them on a bed, but like they might be a kind of topography of a memory. Here's another one. And then the most recent one is this full blanket called Swath, where there's men's, but also just embroidery, and then this kind of feeling of tension and restriction. And I am excited to get back to this when I get a studio. I'm also excited to do this thing, and I'm showing you a really bad drawing, because this is how things start, where this might actually become a kind of installation where there's gathering of blankets and other fabric, but there might also be vertical structures that are stitched and sutured together, and it makes a kind of landscape. So change, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, where'd it go? To sit together.
If you guys would share this.
All right. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay. So does anybody want to ask a question? Anybody have a question? Oh,
Hello. Thank you both so much. That was just so magical to see both of you guys presenting in the same talk, and that's kind of what my question is about. I know that you both, despite the fact that, of course, your work is so different from each other's, you both have characters in your work, and you both talked about like the human body and skin, which I thought was so interesting to then see that go in such different directions the way that you two create. And I was just wondering if, as you were even just watching each other this evening, if you had any thoughts about media and the skin. I know that's kind of a put you on the spot question, but that's what was coming up for me.
You don't want to start? As Peter was talking, I was struck immediately when he started talking about how wood is like skin, and loved like in my head, I loved that he has this hard material that can be made organic, and mine relies on other kinds of structures to make it organic or hard, and that there is that kind of sensitivity of the material and how it can relate to our bodies and talk so much about how we experience things. So yeah, as beginning thoughts, I thought that was really incredible that we were put together at the same time.
Yeah, I felt this same way. It might be totally irrelevant, but I'm Peter Park, so I'm only missing an E and R from Peter Parker. And when I saw Spider-Man needing, I was like, oh my God, that's just so right. But I was really responding to, addition to what Mark was saying about the fact that the fact that we talk about or think about the skin and the similarity between our body and the material that we use, but also that we are inspired by cartoon characters. And I feel like I get inspired by those figures in a very abstract way. I don't think I ever conceptualize or intellectualize as much as you did, but at the same time, it's always one of the things that it's in the back of my mind. I was hugely influenced by the images that I show. It was images that I grew up seeing, and also particularly American cartoon character for some reason, and seeing those references were, and you might have seen it. I didn't really talk about it too much on the slideshow, but the guitars that I made were, a lot of them were from old vintage American cartoon characters, and I was like, that's a connection there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah.
guitars.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that too. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi. Well, one, it was so interesting to see the two of you together, just because it's such like a tactile experience for both of them. I'm just kind of interested on how both of you guys see or like approach the idea of like curating a touch, or like discovering, like, because Mark, for you it's so personal because you're physically touching, and not a lot of people get to touch your pieces like day to day, even though they are textiles. And then for you, Peter, people are meant to sit in them and feel them. So I'm just so curious about how you guys both approach like how you'll feel, or Mark, I guess, how people will imagine to feel those pieces.
You can go first if you want.
Well, the thing about making furniture and showing them on an exhibition, it's more often it's on display with the sign says please don't touch, please don't sit on. It was one of the things that it kind of threw me off when I was studying fine art, and I would go to exhibitions or shows, and I would see these amazing paintings or sculptures, and I'm the weirdo gets too close, and the security are one step back, and I'm just like bummed by. I was always bummed by how I couldn't touch what I was seeing, and one of the biggest reason I started making things rather than painting things was that I'd rather make things that you can use than just to look at. So, especially in the beginning of my showing my pieces, I always would want to please touch, please show, and then later I would, pay the consequences of getting scratch on, smoothly sanded surfaces. But yet I do still feel that that is an important part of my creative practice, and I think it completes the piece when someone sits on it or feels it, touch it. It just makes me happy when that happens, and it's more better when those feedback becomes more specific, and yeah.
Yeah. You used an interesting phrase, curate a touch. I'd never quite thought about it that way. And I've lived my whole professional life as somebody who the work is always just beyond there for other people. And in that way, I think the way I factor that in is that it's like I'm drawing on people's memory of textiles and of their skin, and so that it's about putting it into their head and their experiences, as opposed to strictly feeling the stuff of what I've done. That's that's part of it that's for me, to be quite honest. And in relationship to just like the whole idea of change, one of the things that is always kind of weird about doing an artist talk is I'm telling you what I think, right? The work's not actually complete until somebody else sees it and interacts with it and brings their experiences. For me, it's not them getting to touch, like with Peter's pieces, but it's that they do get to bring their memories. So it's really important that that exchange can happen and that people have the freedom to do that, and that my stuff, my ideas are just the trigger for that. That said, like before they're framed, and even the last pieces aren't framed at all. They hang in space, and people will say, well, because Peter's not the only one on this stage that touches things and tries to get too close to art. And there's more of us than we care to say. And if somebody's in the gallery with me and says, oh, but, it's like, go ahead, touch it. It's a wool blanket. It's not going to die. It's muslin. It's fine. So, yeah, some people get to touch it. Yeah.
Hi. Such exciting work, and I think everyone's agreeing that you do presented very similar themes with different materials. And one thing that I enjoyed so much from both your work is this kind of sense of humor. And within craft, and folk art, how humor has been brought in as a tool to communicate and express joy. And I'm curious to know how both of you see humor as a tool to relieve grief, or as a tool to convey your own personal experiences in life, and humor as a way to, like, I don't know, counter the banality of certain things that we're used to every day.
Sure. Not that I'm going to keep stealing from the people that ask questions their phrases, but humor as a tool is exactly how I think about it. It's a way to invite people in a space where not everybody's comfortable. Contemporary art's something that intimidates people, unfortunately. And when you can make a flaccid acrylic bright green thing that looks sort of like a body, some people take it seriously, but also it's kind of goofy, to be quite honest. And hopefully that disarms somebody enough that they want to figure out what's next and bring their own experiences to it. I think humor is a great tool for that. It's also just a way of being so essentially, basically human,
I definitely enjoy when I'm confronted with the humor in someone else's work or at a show. And I love comedy. But comedy is so tricky, I found. When you try it so hard to make it funny, it's almost never funny. But then there are moments where you didn't really intend it to be funny, but all of a sudden you realize that this is funny. And my position would be I wouldn't back out from it when it happens naturally. And I love when that happens, because it doesn't happen all the time, or it doesn't happen when I try really hard to make it happen. But yeah, I really love when that happens naturally.
Any other questions? Oh.
Hey, I guess this is kind of for both of you. What's really refreshing about these talks is we get to hear the idea, what sort of has inspired, something to come about, and then we see the result immediately. And then even when you do share process images, it's still this thing that we're able to experience in a moment that, but I guess behind it is like hours and hours of, knitting together a costume or carving away at a chair. And there's this beautifully performative way that envelops in a talk. But I'm really curious about where your minds are in sort of the tedium of making. Like as you're knitting and as you're carving away, where are both of your brains going?
Should I go? Yeah, it is mind-numbing when a piece goes so long, and all you're thinking about is just, I can't wait this piece to be done, and I think it is a downside of working on a project that takes so long, and it, part of it is that it kind of takes the freshness of the idea away from you while you're working on it. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why I make those bowls, addition to the chair pieces that I make. Because the seating units that I make are definitely the main line of work that I really like to make, and I really try to be serious about it. But I need something that I can finish much quicker than 6 weeks or 3 months a piece. For the first reason I said, but also something I feel like I needed something quick that it will give me feedbacks or results, experience that I can use it into the next piece and apply it or experiment. And the pieces that take so long, it's so hard to make fun decisions. Like so I think smaller pieces really help me really be fun with ideas and then try new things. And when I came to something that it's like, oh, fresh, this is fun, I feel like I can apply it to something bigger, then I would try those onto bigger pieces that would take long, and I would still won't feel so dragged about it.
Where's my head? So there's the mundane part of the studio where my head is wrestling with just getting there and getting to work. And sometimes that means I've got distractions. Instead of actually paying attention to the work, I'm listening to music or I'm listening to a podcast or something, because there's a lot of mechanical, just repetitive action. But when things are working right, and that's not all the time, or when things are happening that connect me back to why I'm making art in the first place, that sort of first impulse of, oh, I get lost in this and I can see things in a way that I don't usually see them, then I'm thinking about the work and what's next, and sort of like what Peter was just saying, whether it's a small piece that's giving me inspiration for a new piece, or whether it's something that happens within a piece that raises a question about what I can do, or even that moment of, damn, I screwed this thing up and I have to cut all this out. It's like, when things are really good, it's a give and take between the pieces. And so it's kind of, my head's buried in my own little zone. And that's that's actually the goal for the next part of life. When somebody asked me what was my goal when I retire, I said, well, to get lost in my work so I forget about buying groceries, or I forget about paying bills, or don't have to think about faculty meetings ever again. So yeah, that's where I hope the work ahead is.
Thank you very much. Tomorrow, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
One quick question.
I was curious about a different stage in the process. Like you shared kind of, the things that were on your mind that wound up in the work, like keeping your kids safe or motorcycles. And I'm just really curious to hear more about like, what were the steps in between? Like what's your process for, incorporating something that's on your mind into the design of a chair, which must be like really planned and.
Sure. Well, I alluded to the fact that sometimes there's transitional pieces that I'm not going to show because I don't ever want to share those with people. And sometimes the transition is multiple things that take time, and they might be tests, they might be attempts at new pieces. Like I'm working towards the idea, going from one thing to another. That happened with costumes to the mended pieces. Like there was a couple of years actually of overlap where, I tried sewing into t-shirts with designs printed on them, and I tried taking them apart and putting them together, and none of it worked. But luckily I was also still knitting costumes, so I was overlapping. When the abstract sculptures changed to the trading cards, it was that fast. I had just gotten the idea, and I thought, I need to put beads on trading cards. Yeah, and all those responses, and I just went with it. And so it just depends on where things are. It's kind of a gut feeling.
That kind of spark, like that kind of quick transition, I think for me happens very rarely. It happens though, like very once in a while. And I'm usually very slowly developing an image or a thing that I really want to build on my sketchbook a lot. So I draw pages and pages of ideas, and I look at a lot of things, and I try to at one point my ex-teacher told me that you're like the sculptor from the encounters of the third kind, the sculptor who just like triggered stimulus by all these things that he doesn't know why he's responding, but he keeps doing, and then eventually leads to he eventually figures out, but he throws his life away to figure that out, and it takes that long for me to develop an idea, and I really want that process to be quicker and more spontaneous and more, like jazz. Like if you can just kind of come up with things. It's really hard for me to do that, and I've been just religiously sticking to my sketchbook until I get to a concrete idea for a long time, and now I'm in a good day, in a studio, I try to pull off the improvisation. And it's not always successful, but that's something that I really wanted to try as an artist, because my process is usually so slowly developed.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody.
And Mark will be in sculpture and Peter will be in wood, so you can come by later this week and see what's going on in their workshops. And tomorrow morning we'll have a general orientation here at 8:45 for all the new workshops.